The Valorian scout vessel Eternal Patience floated in the darkness of space like a predator waiting for its prey. For 17 standard cycles, the ship had watched the human colony vessel from a safe distance. Commander Thelix stood on the bridge, his 4 eyes studying the holographic display that showed every detail of the human ship called Ararang Dawn. The Valorians were tall creatures with gray skin and long arms that ended in sharp claws. They had conquered 37 species across the galaxy. They had built an empire on fear and superior technology. Their sensor systems were the most advanced in known space, capable of detecting threats at the molecular level. Those sensors had scanned the Ararang Dawn over 40,000 times. The results never changed. The display always showed the same words in glowing letters: "No danger detected." Thelix found this amusing. He turned to his second officer, a younger Valorian named Kreth, and made a sound that passed for laughter among his kind. "Look at them," Thelix said, pointing at the human life signs on the display. "Soft bodies. No natural weapons. No armor. No venom. They are like the grass eaters we feed upon back home." Kreth nodded eagerly. "Their captain is a female, small, barely 1.6 meters tall. Our warriors could break her with one hand." The sensors provided more data. The humans had slow heartbeats. Their body temperature was low compared to Valorian standards. Their hormone patterns showed basic fight-or-flight responses, nothing special. They carried no visible weapons. Their ship had minimal defensive systems. Everything pointed to an easy capture. Thelix gave the order to prepare the boarding party. 12 of his finest warriors armed themselves with plasma rifles and shock batons. They wore light armor because the sensors said they would not need heavy protection. This would be simple. This would be quick. The humans would surrender, hand over their cargo and navigation charts. And the Eternal Patience would continue on its way. The transport beam activated, and the 12 Valorians materialized on the bridge of the Ararang Dawn. The first thing Thelix noticed was how quiet everything was. The human bridge was smaller than his own, filled with simple consoles and soft lighting. The air smelled strange, carrying scents he could not identify. His sensors automatically began cataloging everything, still reporting no threats. The second thing he noticed was the human captain. Una sat in her command chair as if she had been expecting visitors. She was exactly as the sensors had described: small, soft, with dark hair pulled back from her face and eyes that seemed too calm for someone facing armed invaders. She wore a simple uniform with no armor and no visible weapons. She looked up at Thelix and smiled. "We've been expecting you," she said. Her voice was steady. There was no fear in it. Thelix found this strange but not concerning. Some species accepted their fate with dignity. He respected them, even if he did not understand it. "I am Commander Thelix of the Valorian Empire," he announced, his claws clicking together in a gesture of authority. "You will surrender your cargo and provide us with your navigation charts. Resist, and you will be destroyed." Una nodded slowly. "I understand. There is no need for violence." She turned to her crew. "Everyone, stand down. Do not resist." The bridge crew obeyed immediately. A tall man named Dohwan, who served as second in command, lowered his hands and stepped away from his console. He was thin and looked tired, with gray showing in his black hair. The sensors confirmed he was no threat. A young woman named Jie stood near the security station. She was the ship's security officer, but she carried no weapons. Her face showed no expression as she watched the Valorians spread across the bridge. She stood completely still, like a statue, her eyes tracking every movement the aliens made. The sensors scanned her. No danger detected. An older man named Tayson worked at the engineering console. He had kind eyes and gentle hands, the hands of someone who fixed things rather than broke them. He too had stepped back from his station, as ordered. No danger detected. Daleks felt satisfied. This was proceeding exactly as expected. The humans were weak, just as the data showed. They knew they could not win against Valorian might, so they chose survival through surrender. It was the logical choice. Wise decision, Daleks said to Una. Your cargo will be transferred to our vessel. Your charts will be copied. If you cooperate fully, we may allow you to continue your journey. Of course, Una replied. That strange smile remained on her face. Take what you need. As Daleks' warriors began accessing the human computer systems, the commander walked slowly across the bridge. He enjoyed these moments of power, when conquered species looked upon him with helpless acceptance. He studied the primitive human technology, amused by how simple it all seemed. Then he heard a small sound. It came from behind the captain's chair. A soft whimper, quickly silenced. Daleks moved around the chair and found what he was looking for. A child, perhaps 7 or 8 human years old, huddled against the back of the seat. The little girl had tears on her face and terror in her eyes. She was trying very hard not to make any noise. The sensors scanned her automatically. No danger detected. Daleks felt something stir inside him. Not mercy. Valorians did not understand mercy. It was curiosity mixed with a dark kind of amusement. Human children were rare finds. They could be valuable on certain markets. He reached down, his claws extending toward the child. What is this? He asked, his voice carrying a cruel edge. A little one, hiding from the monsters? The child pressed herself harder against the chair, trying to disappear. Una's smile vanished. In that moment, something changed in the air of the bridge. It was not something the sensors could detect. There was no chemical shift, no electromagnetic pulse, no measurable change in any physical property. But Doan straightened slightly. Jihee's eyes narrowed. Tayson's gentle hands curled into fists. And Una moved. She moved faster than anything the Valorian sensors had predicted. She moved faster than Daleks' 4 eyes could track. One moment she was sitting in her chair, calm and cooperative. The next moment her hand was wrapped around his reaching arm, and pain exploded through his shoulder as something broke. The sensors continued their assessment even as Daleks screamed. No danger detected. No danger detected. No danger detected. The Valorian threat detection systems were famous throughout the galaxy. Scientists from 100 worlds had studied them and failed to create anything better. These systems could measure the strength of a creature's muscles down to individual fibers. They could detect hidden weapons at the molecular level. They could analyze brain chemistry and predict aggressive behavior before the creature itself knew it would attack. But the systems had been designed by Valorians, and Valorians had never truly understood humans. There was no metric in their programming for the human concept of will. There was no algorithm that could calculate the power of a mother's protective instinct. There was no sensor in the galaxy that could measure what happens inside a human heart when someone threatens their family. Una was not a soldier. She had never trained for combat. She was a scientist who had become a captain because she was good at keeping people calm and making difficult decisions. Her body was exactly what the sensors said it was: small, soft, and physically unremarkable. But in the moment Daleks' claws reached for the child behind her chair, Una stopped being what the sensors measured. She became something else entirely. Her hand caught Daleks' arm before his brain could process the movement. She did not use enhanced strength because she did not have any. Instead, she used something humans had learned over millions of years of survival. She used leverage. She used momentum. She used the simple physics of a small creature fighting a larger one. She twisted her body, pulled the commander's arm across her hip, and pushed with her legs. Daleks' shoulders separated with a wet popping sound that echoed across the silent bridge. The Valorian commander fell to his knees, screaming in a language his translation device could not convert to human speech. The whole thing took less than half a second. Do-Hwan moved next. The tall, tired-looking man who had seemed so harmless transformed in an instant. His hand found a maintenance tool on his console, a heavy metal device used for adjusting power relays. It was not a weapon. The sensors had correctly identified it as a simple tool, but in Do-Hwan's hands, it became something different. He swung it in a wide arc, catching the nearest Valorian guard across the face. The guard's helmet cracked. Before the body hit the ground, Do-Hwan had already turned to the next target. His movements were not graceful or trained. They were desperate and furious, the movements of a man who had spent his whole life being gentle and had finally found a reason to stop. The second guard raised his plasma rifle. Do-Hwan did not try to dodge. He stepped forward into the danger and drove his shoulder into the guard's chest. They went down together, and Do-Hwan's tool rose and fell twice before he stood up again. 2 guards down in less than 3 seconds. Ji-Hye had waited. She was younger than the others, and she understood something that the aliens did not. She understood that surprise was a weapon, and she wanted to use it at the perfect moment. When the guards turned their attention to Do-Hwan, Ji-Hye moved. She dropped to her knees, slid beneath her console, and came up with an emergency plasma cutter in her hands. It was a safety device designed to cut through wreckage during rescue operations. The sensors had classified it as a tool with no combat applications. The sensors were wrong. Ji-Hye pressed the activation button and swung the cutter in a horizontal arc. The plasma blade, designed to slice through ship armor, passed through Valorian light armor like it was made of paper. 2 more guards collapsed, their weapons falling from their hands. Tayson, the gentle engineer with kind eyes, did not fight. Instead, he did something far more dangerous. While the chaos erupted around him, he calmly walked to the transport console and began entering commands. His fingers moved with the precision of someone who had spent decades understanding how machines worked. The Valorian transport system was advanced, but it was still just a machine. And Tayson understood machines better than the Valorians understood humans. In 12 seconds, he had accessed the transport link between the 2 ships. In 15 seconds, he had identified the command frequency. In 18 seconds, he had severed the connection completely. The remaining Valorians on the bridge were now trapped. Yuna had not stopped moving since she first grabbed Thelix. She left the commander writhing on the ground and threw herself at the next guard. She was smaller than him by half a meter and weaker by every measurable standard. It did not matter. She hit him low, driving her shoulder into his legs, and he fell backward. Before he could recover, she had his own shock baton in her hands and pressed it against the soft tissue under his chin. The bridge had become a battlefield, and the humans were winning. The Valorian sensors continued their constant assessment, still unable to understand what was happening. They measured human heart rates and found them elevated. They detected stress hormones flooding through human bloodstreams. They noted increased electrical activity in human brains, but none of these readings registered as dangerous. The humans were simply scared. Scared creatures were not threats. Scared creatures ran away, except humans did not run. Instead, their fear transformed into something the sensors had no name for. Their bodies pushed past normal limits. Their reaction times shortened by factors the Valorians had never observed. Their pain tolerance increased to levels that should have been impossible without chemical enhancement. One guard managed to fire his plasma rifle. The bolt struck Do-Hwan in the arm, burning through cloth and skin. Do-Hwan did not stop. He did not even slow down. He turned toward the guard who shot him and charged, his wounded arm hanging at his side. His working arm swinging the maintenance tool in a deadly arc. The guard Trained in combat since childhood, froze in confusion. His sensors told him the human was injured. Injured creatures retreated. Injured creatures protected their wounds. They did not attack with greater fury than before, but Dohan did not by the time the bridge fell silent. 9 Valorian guards lay unconscious or disabled on the deck. The remaining 3 had retreated to the corridor outside, sealing emergency bulkheads behind them. They sent panicked signals to the eternal patients, begging for transport, begging for help, but Tayson had cut the transport link. They were alone, on the bridge. Eunice stood over the fallen Commander Thelix. Her breathing was heavy. Her hands shook. The adrenaline that had carried her through the fight was beginning to fade, leaving behind exhaustion and trembling muscles. But she was still standing. She looked down at the Valorian commander, who stared up at her with 4 eyes filled with something he had never felt before: fear. "Your sensors," Eunice said quietly, her voice steady despite her shaking hands, "told you we were not dangerous. Your sensors were wrong. We are not warriors. We are not predators. We are ordinary people who will do extraordinary things when you threaten those we love." She knelt down beside him, and her voice dropped to a whisper. "Remember this lesson. Tell your empire. Spread the word across the galaxy. Humans are peaceful until we are pushed. But when we are pushed—" She paused, looking back at the child who was still hiding behind her chair, alive and unharmed. "When we are pushed, your sensors cannot measure what we become." The story of the Araring incident spread across the galaxy like fire spreading through dry grass. Traders carried it from port to port. Diplomats whispered it in the halls of power. Military commanders studied it with growing unease. A colony ship with no weapons had defeated a Valorian boarding party. A crew of scientists and engineers had overpowered trained soldiers. A small woman had broken the arm of a Valorian commander. The sensors had said no danger. The sensors had been wrong. The Valorian Empire demanded an explanation. They sent angry messages to every human diplomatic station. They insisted that the humans must have cheated somehow. There must have been hidden technology. There must have been cybernetic enhancements buried beneath human skin. There must have been something the sensors should have detected. Ambassador Yunji received these demands with a calm expression and a patient smile. She was a woman in her 50s, with silver streaks in her black hair and a quiet strength in her eyes. She had spent 30 years building bridges between humanity and the other species of the galaxy. She knew how to speak so that others would listen. The Galactic Assembly gathered in the great hall of the neutral station called Crossroads. Representatives from over 200 species filled the circular chamber, sitting in seats designed for bodies of every shape and size. Holographic translators floated above them, converting every word into 1,000 languages. Yunji stood in the center of the chamber, a small human figure surrounded by giants and monsters and creatures that defied description. She looked fragile. She looked powerless. The Valorian representative, a towering figure named High Commander Vroth, spoke first. His voice boomed across the chamber like thunder. "The humans have committed an act of aggression against the Valorian Empire. They attacked our soldiers without provocation. They used hidden weapons that our superior sensors could not detect. We demand they reveal these technologies and submit to full inspection of all human vessels." Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Many species had similar sensor technology. If the humans could bypass Valorian sensors, they could bypass everyone's sensors. This was a serious concern. Yunji waited for silence before she spoke. "Distinguished representatives," she began, her voice clear and steady. "The Valorian account of events is incomplete. Allow me to provide additional context." She activated a holographic display that showed the bridge of the Araring Dawn. The assembly watched as Bayos, Valorian soldiers, materialized among unarmed humans. They watched as Commander Thelix walked across the bridge like a predator among prey. They watched as he reached for a hiding child, and they watched as Yuna moved. The recording showed everything in slow motion. The humans had not used hidden weapons. They had used their bodies, their tools, and something else that was harder to define. Something that burned in their eyes and drove their limbs to move faster than should have been possible. When the recording ended, Yunji spoke again. "Your sensors measured what we are," she said, looking directly at the Valorian representative. "They cannot measure what we become when pushed," she explained, using simple words that every species could understand. She talked about adrenaline, the chemical that flooded human bodies during moments of extreme stress. She described how human muscles could perform beyond their normal limits when survival demanded it. She spoke of pain tolerance that could increase by 300% when someone humans loved was in danger. "This is not hidden technology," Inji continued. "This is biology. This is evolution. For millions of years, humans survived on a planet that wanted to kill us. We were not the strongest creatures. We were not the fastest. We had no claws, no venom, no armor. But we survived because when death came for our children, we became something else." She displayed biological data on the holographic screen. Heart rates that doubled in seconds. Muscle performance that exceeded laboratory predictions by factors that made no scientific sense. Brain activity that shifted into patterns associated with complete disregard for personal safety. The mother who lifts a vehicle off her trapped child. The soldier who continues fighting with wounds that should be fatal. The ordinary person who runs into burning buildings to save strangers. Yunji paused, letting her words settle over the assembly. "These are not legends. These are documented events. They happen every day on our world." The chamber was silent. 200 species sat in stunned stillness, processing what they were hearing. The Kethrani representative, a being made of crystalline structures that chimed when it moved, finally spoke. Its voice was translated as calm curiosity. "How does one prepare to face an enemy whose threat level cannot be predicted?" Yunji smiled. It was the same smile Yuna had shown to Thelix moments before breaking his arm. A smile that contained no humor and no malice, only absolute certainty. "You do not," she said. "You simply choose not to make enemies of us." The assembly erupted in conversation. Translators worked overtime as dozens of species debated what they had just heard. Some were skeptical. Some were frightened. A few, the older species who had seen empires rise and fall, nodded with something like respect. Unji stood quietly in the center of it all, waiting. Finally, the assembly coordinator, an ancient being whose species had founded the galactic community, called for order. When silence returned, the coordinator spoke. "This testimony will be entered into the permanent record. All species are advised to update their threat assessment protocols regarding humanity." The coordinator paused, its many eyes focusing on Yunji. "Ambassador, humanity has proven itself capable of violence when provoked. How can the galaxy trust that humans will remain peaceful?" Yunji considered the question carefully before answering. "We are not a violent species by nature," she said. "Our history shows countless examples of humans choosing peace over war, cooperation over conflict. We have built our civilization on trade, science, and mutual benefit. The crew of the Ararang Dawn did not want to fight. They wanted to surrender. They tried to surrender." Her voice hardened slightly. "But they were not attacked. They were not raided. They were threatened with the kidnapping of a child. And that is something humans cannot allow. Will never allow. No matter what your sensors say about our threat level." She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of representatives from every species present. "We do not ask the galaxy to fear us. We ask only to be respected. Treat us with fairness, and you will find no better friends among the stars. Threaten those we love, and you will find no worse enemies." The assembly session ended without formal resolution. But as the representatives filed out of the Great Chamber, the conversations that followed would shape galactic politics for decades. The Valorian Empire quietly withdrew its demands. Other species began approaching humanity with offers of alliance and trade. Pirates who had once targeted human vessels suddenly found other hunting grounds dotted and across the galaxy. Sensor technicians began adding a new category to their threat assessment systems. A category that could not be measured or predicted. A category that simply read, "Human exercise caution." 20 years passed after the Arrowing incident, and the galaxy slowly changed its opinion about humanity. It was not a dramatic shift. There were no grand announcements or official declarations. Instead, it happened in small moments, in quiet conversations, in the way other species began to look at humans differently. Trade agreements multiplied. Alliance treaties were signed. Human colonies, which had once been seen as easy targets for pirates and opportunistic empires, suddenly found themselves left alone. It was not because humans had become more powerful. It was because the galaxy had finally understood what they already were. Captain Una retired from active service 3 years after the incident. The fame was too much for her. She had never wanted to be a symbol. She had just wanted to protect her crew and the child who had been hiding behind her chair. That child, a girl named Somi, had grown up healthy and safe. She visited Una often at her small home on Earth, where the former captain spent her days reading and gardening and trying to forget the sound of breaking bones. "Do you ever regret it?" Somi asked one afternoon. As they sat in Una's garden watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Yun, I thought about the question for a long time before answering. "I regret that it was necessary," she finally said. "I do not regret doing it." The Human Defense Initiative recruited Una as a consultant. She helped train new crews and develop protocols for dealing with hostile contact. But she always reminded her students of one important truth. "We are not warriors," she would say. "We are ordinary people. And that is exactly what makes us dangerous. A warrior expects to fight. A warrior is always ready. But when ordinary people are forced to fight, we surprise even ourselves." Dr. Minho became one of the most respected xenopsychologists in the galaxy. He traveled from world to world, giving lectures at universities and military academies, explaining human nature to species that had never understood it. His most famous lecture was given at the Galactic Academy, where the children of 100 species came to learn about each other. The hall was packed with students of every shape and size. Holographic translators floated above their heads, converting Minho's words into languages he could not even pronounce. "The mistake every species makes," Minho explained, gesturing at a display showing human biological data, "is believing that detection equals prediction. Your technologies can tell you everything about a human's current state. You can measure our heart rate, our body temperature, our hormone levels. You can calculate our muscle strength and reaction time." He paused, letting the words sink in. "But none of that tells you what we will do next. Because humans exist in a state of permanent potential. We are, at every moment, capable of becoming something entirely different." He showed comparison charts. Human vital signs at rest versus human vital signs during what he called protective rage. The differences were startling, even to students who had seen them before. Heart rates that tripled in seconds. Reaction times that cut in half. Pain response that nearly disappeared. A young Valorian student raised a hand. Minho nodded for them to speak. "How is this possible without cybernetic enhancement?" The student asked. "Our doctors have examined humans. They are biologically unremarkable." Minho smiled kindly at the young Valorian. There was no anger in his expression, only patience. "That is exactly the point," he said. "We are biologically unremarkable. And yet, when our children are threatened, we become something remarkable. When our families are in danger, we exceed every measurement your instruments can take. This is not enhancement. This is what we always were. We simply had not shown you yet." Meanwhile, GA had become something of a legend throughout the galaxy. The young security officer who had wielded a plasma cutter against armored soldiers was now known as the Ghost of Ararum, a name she found embarrassing but could not escape. The Galactic Peacekeeping Force recruited her personally. They wanted to study her, to understand how she had done what she did. But there was nothing special about her biology. She was an ordinary human woman with ordinary human abilities. What made her different was how she used them. She trained alongside species twice her size and 3 times her natural strength. Warriors from worlds where combat was a way of life came to spar with her, expecting easy victories. They rarely got them. GA did not fight with strength or speed. She fought with adaptation. When conditions changed, she changed with them. When plans failed, she improvised. When sensors said she posed no threat, she proved them catastrophically wrong. One of her trainers, an ancient warrior from a species that had conquered half a galaxy before choosing peace, once asked her to explain her fighting style. "I do not have a style," Jihei admitted. "I just do whatever is necessary." "That," the old warrior replied, "is the most dangerous style of all." Taisin, the gentle engineer who had severed the transport link during the battle, became famous in different circles. The galactic engineering community celebrated him as a genius who could understand any machine within minutes of seeing it. He designed new ships that could outmaneuver anything the galaxy produced. He created defensive systems that relied not on weapons, but on mobility and surprise. His designs were adopted by human colonies throughout the galaxy, making them harder targets for anyone who still considered attacking. But Tayson never forgot his experience on the Ararum Dawn. He understood something that many others did not. Humans were not naturally violent. They did not enjoy fighting. But when fighting became necessary, they would use everything they had. "A weapon is just a tool," he once told a reporter who asked about his work. Humans are the same. In our normal state, we are tools for building, creating, exploring. But when survival demands it, we become tools for destruction. And we are very, very effective at whatever we become. Dowan, the tired man who had fought with a maintenance tool and a burning arm, did not live to see his fame spread. He passed away 10 years after the incident, his body finally giving out after a life of quiet service. They built a statue of him in the memorial park that honored the crew of the Ararum Dawn. It showed him standing tall, his eyes looking toward the stars, his hands empty but ready. The inscription at the base read, "He was tired, he was gentle, and when his family needed him, he became something more." Thousands of visitors came to see it every year. Many of them were not human. They stood before the statue and tried to understand how such an ordinary-looking man could have done such extraordinary things. They never fully understood. But they remembered, and remembering was enough to make them think twice before threatening humanity again. 50 years had passed since the Ararum incident. The galaxy had changed in ways that the old Valorian Empire could never have predicted. Old enemies had become trading partners. Former conquerors had learned the value of cooperation. And humanity had taken its place among the stars, not as warriors or conquerors, but as something perhaps more important. They had become the species that other species thought twice about threatening. A delegation of young Valorians arrived on Earth as part of a cultural exchange program. They were third-generation children, born long after the incident, raised in a Valorian society that had been forced to reconsider its relationship with the galaxy. Their grandparents had conquered worlds. Their parents had learned humility. They came seeking understanding. They were nervous as they stepped off their transport and onto human soil. The stories of what had happened to Commander Thelix were still told among their people. The name Una was spoken in whispers, like the name of a demon from old legends. Their sensors, updated over decades, but still following the same basic principles, automatically scanned the humans waiting to greet them. No danger detected. An elderly woman walked toward them, moving slowly with a slight limp. Her hair had gone completely white. Her face was lined with age. She looked like a grandmother, like someone who should be sitting in a comfortable chair, telling stories to children. She looked like no threat at all. "Welcome to Earth," she said, her voice warm and genuine. "My name is Una. I will be your guide during your visit." The young Valorians froze. They knew that name. Everyone in the galaxy knew that name. This small, frail woman was the one who had broken Commander Thelix. This grandmother was the ghost of Araring herself. This weak-looking human was the reason their empire had learned to respect rather than conquer. Their sensors continued their automatic assessment. No danger detected. Una noticed them looking at their instruments. She laughed, and it was a warm sound, full of genuine amusement rather than menace. "Those things will never give you the answer you are looking for," she said. "Come, let me show you something." She led them through the city, walking slowly but steadily. The young Valorians could have outpaced her easily, but they matched her speed. Partly out of respect and partly because they were afraid of what might happen if they did not. They passed through busy streets where humans and aliens walked together. They saw markets where goods from 100 worlds were traded. They watched human children playing with children of other species, laughing together in languages that mixed and merged. "When I was young," Una said as they walked, "humanity was alone. We had just begun to explore the stars. Other species saw us as weak, easy targets, creatures to be conquered or ignored." She paused at a crosswalk, waiting for the signal to change. Even after 50 years, even as a legendary figure, she followed the simple rules of everyday life. We were weak in many ways. We still are. Our bodies are soft. We have no natural weapons. We cannot breathe underwater or survive in vacuum. By every measure your sensors use, we should not have survived. The signal changed, and she continued walking. But we did survive. And do you know why? The young Valorians shook their heads, hanging on her every word. "Because we had each other," Una said simply. "Because when danger came for one of us, all of us became dangerous. Your species evolved alone, at the top of your food chain. You never needed to protect each other from predators. But humans did. For millions of years, we huddled together against the darkness, and we learned that our greatest strength was not in our bodies." She stopped in front of a memorial park. Stone monuments rose among the trees, bearing names and dates and short inscriptions. At the center stood a statue of a tired-looking man with gentle eyes and empty hands. "Dohan," Una said softly, looking at the statue. He'd passed away 10 years after the incident. His wounds never fully healed, but he never regretted what he did. She led them past other monuments. A fountain bore Tazen's name. He had died 5 years ago, surrounded by students who carried on his work. A wall displayed the names of every crew member from the Araring Dawn. "We were ordinary people," Una said, her voice quiet but steady. "Scientists, pilots, engineers, parents. We had no military training, no special abilities. We were exactly what your ancestors' sensors said we were." She turned to face the young Valorians. Despite her age, despite her frailty, there was something in her eyes that made them take a step back. But when that soldier reached for the child behind my chair, when I saw his claws extending toward her, I stopped being what your sensors could measure. I became something else. Something older. Something your instruments have no name for. The young Valorians were silent. They understood, finally, what their grandparents had learned through pain and defeat. They understood why their empire had changed its ways. Your species believes the power must be constant to be real, Una continued. That threat must be visible to be valid. But humans carry our strength like a seed. It lies dormant until something makes it grow. She looked up at them. And despite her white hair and wrinkled skin, despite every sensor reading that said she was harmless, they felt a chill run through their bodies. And when it grows, she finished, it grows faster than your sensors can recalibrate. The exchange students left Earth 3 weeks later. They had learned many things. They had tasted human food and heard human music. They had studied human history and walked through human cities. But the lesson they remembered most was the one Una taught them in the memorial park. The lesson that sensors could not measure. The lesson that their empire had learned at the cost of their pride. Humans were peaceful. Humans were friendly. Humans wanted nothing more than to trade and explore and build a better future together. But humans also remembered. They remembered every child who had been threatened, every family that had been attacked, every colony that had been raided. They remembered, and they taught their children, and their children taught their children, and somewhere in every human heart, dormant but never gone, lived the capacity to become something the galaxy could never predict. The young Valorians went home and shared what they had learned. They told the story of the elderly woman who had once broken a commander's arm. They described the memorial park and the statue of the gentleman who had fought with a maintenance tool. They explained what they now understood about humanity. And in Valorian schools, teachers updated their lessons. They still taught about the sensors that said no danger detected. But now they added a warning at the end. The sensors were wrong. And they always will be, because the most dangerous thing about humans is not what they are. It is what they become.